Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Now, make sure to subscribe and follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with 3 to 4 people you know. Before I get into the main topic for today, I want to take a minute to speak directly to all the parents of high school students out there. The United States Department of Education has launched something called the Presidential 1776 Award. This is a national civics competition, and it's created to mark our 250th anniversary. Now, I highlight this because I spend a lot of time here criticizing the failures of our education system, how our education system is devoid of actually learning, that civic ignorance plagues our country. We constantly see this decline in standards that most people today have no idea what their civic responsibilities are. So this is one initiative that's actually doing the opposite. It's an initiative I could get behind. So the Presidential 1776 Award is open to high school students, grades 9 through 12. There's no participation trophy in this competition. It is designed to test serious knowledge of things like the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitutional Convention, the foundational principles that built our constitutional republic. The competition is going to unfold in 3 rounds. It's going to start what they call the Impossible Civics Test. If you qualify, if you pass that test and qualify, students advance to regional semifinals, and the final round is a national broadcast civics bee at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. The beauty of this, there is a total scholarship pool of $250,000, and the top winner will receive $150,000 toward their future education. Registration is now open. I have the links up at the PAS report in the show notes, so check it out there. You can link that from there. You could also share that link with other people. If you're a parent that has a child in high school, a teacher that knows a student who takes American history seriously, this is worth looking into and signing up for. And even if they're not strong in American history, if they're not strong in our founding, sign them up anyway, because they can learn a lot by participating in this. So February 21st is the deadline for registering, and round 1 begins on February 22nd. This actually directly relates to today's episode because we are turning 250 years old. Our Constitution is turning 239 years old, and that's a long time. Very few nations in human history have sustained a constitutional republic for that long. We have the oldest codified constitution on the planet, despite being one of the youngest nations on the planet. Throughout history, we've seen empires rise and empires fall. Civilizations flourish and collapse. Governments form and they dissolve. Political systems decay, fracture, disappear into the abyss. Yet here we are, and the American experiment continues to endure. But can it last? That's the question. Can the United States be the exception to the rules of history? Everyone should recognize that civilizations don't survive on autopilot. They survive because each generation understands what's at stake. Each generation decides that their values, their customs, their traditions, their identity is worth preserving. And it's why I do the America's Founding series, where I focus on the forgotten patriots and I connect our founding, our past, to the present. It's so important that we know that. This is why what happened this weekend in Munich matters so much, because what Secretary of State Marco Rubio delivered, it wasn't just a foreign policy speech. It was a civilizational speech. It was a reminder of who we are and where we came from. He explained why we are worth defending, and I am talking about our culture, our history, our values, our identity. This could not have come at a more important time, because for decades, we have lived under this idea of a post-Cold War delusion. We have witnessed oikophobia spread throughout our societies, and I've discussed oikophobia in a previous episode, but for those that don't know what it is, it's when ordinary people in the ruling class of a society have disdain for their own culture, their own country. They've advanced so much that they treat their civilization as something to apologize for. And that's what we're seeing in Western civilization. that we must surrender and dismantle it rather than preserve and defend it. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, many in the West convinced themselves that history had reached its final chapter, that ideological conflict is over, that democratic principles are going to spread to every corner of the world, that they're compatible with every culture around the world, that trade is going to replace nationhood, nation-state concept is a thing of the past. It's the root of the conflicts and it must be destroyed, that global institutions are going to replace sovereignty because they are better arbiters of justice. People said that borders should be non-existent, that citizenship was an accident by birth, that national identity should be dissolved. We're now global citizens, and anyone who values individual citizenship is just simply racist and xenophobic. See, to many in the elite, this globalist push they believed would solve all the world's problems, but they haven't done that, have they? And while some pushing these ideas were doing so because of their disdain for the West, others were simply being naive. Rubio stood in Munich, the same Munich where the line between communism and freedom ran through the heart of Europe, and he said plainly that this belief was dangerous. It was a dangerous delusion. That's not a throwaway line. That's a powerful statement of fact, and it represented a pivot, because for 35 years, our elites, the intelligentsia, they treated sovereignty as an outdated model, that national interest is selfish and evil, that industrial capacity is inefficient, that borders are xenophobic, civilizational pride is embarrassing, and rather than be proud of who we are and where we come from, we should actually be ashamed. That mindset is what has hollowed out the West, and I'm talking both Europe and the United States of America. What did we witness over the last 3.5 decades? Well, we witnessed factories shutter, supply chains outsourced, middle-class jobs shipped overseas, mass migration accelerated to reshape the very meaning of citizenship and fracture the social cohesion throughout nations. We saw these self-imposed energy policies that weakened our economies, and our adversaries exploited fossil fuels and natural resources without any hesitation to fill the void. And through all of it, what did the elites tell us? Well, they told us it was inevitable. But it wasn't inevitable. It was a policy choice, and that is what Rubio made clear. This was not a speech about retreat. It was not a speech about abandoning Europe. It was just not a speech about isolation. It was the opposite. It was a speech about revitalizing the West and revitalizing Western civilization, about reminding Europe and America that we are not simply trade partners. We are a civilization that reshaped the course of human history. And Rubio said something that I believe is going to be quoted for years. He said, quote, "Our home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe," end quote. That is not ethnic nationalism. That is not white supremacy, as the left's going to claim. That is simply historical continuity. The United States did not emerge from nothing in 1776. Understand that the founders drew from English common law, from Roman architecture, governing philosophies, legal traditions, from the Enlightenment, from centuries of Western intellectual development, but most importantly, the Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian philosophies that taught the dignity of the individual, the limits of earthly power, and the radical idea that rights are not granted by the government but endowed by our Creator, God, and secured by law. When Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are created equal, he was not inventing a moral framework from scratch. Through his discussions with Filippo Mazzi, he was drawing on a tradition that preceded him. When James Madison designed checks and balances, he was building on ideas about human nature, power that stretched back all the way to classical antiquity. He identified the failures of those systems. When George Washington warred against factions and permanent foreign alliances, he was speaking as a statesman that was shaped by his experiences. He watched fragile unity between the states nearly collapse under rivalries. He understood ambition. He understood self-interest during the revolution, and he understood how quickly passion at home or abroad can eclipse the national interest. Rubio connected that thread directly over the weekend. He did something that most modern leaders don't have the cojones to do. He spoke unapologetically about Western civilization. He talked about heritage. He talked about faith, about culture, about our sacrifices. And he argued that armies do not fight for abstractions. And I want you to think about that for a second. Armies do not fight for abstractions. They fight for a people. They fight for a culture that's worth fighting for, a culture that links us together. They fight for a nation. They fight for a very way of life. Such a profound statement, because for years, we have reduced our cultural identity to something that we're supposed to apologize for. We treat our culture as the problem in the world, a problem that must be managed. Our history is a crime. Our traditions are obstacles to progress. That our identity should be a source of shame, not pride, and that we must atone not by building on what we inherited from our forefathers, but by dismantling the very foundations that make free societies possible. So the primary question we should all ask ourselves, what exactly are we defending? And if you cannot answer that question clearly, then how could we sustain Western civilization? This is why this speech matters at the 250-year mark of the Declaration of Independence. We are approaching a quarter millennium, and we have to decide, are we simply just a market for the exchange of goods and services, where materialism is everything and we're just looking to acquire stuff? Are we simply a geographic area where borders shouldn't matter? Are we a collection of competing factions where our identities are reduced to nothing more than race and class? Or are we a united people grounded in a common culture with a common history and a common purpose? And Rubio's answer was clear. We are a civilization that should be proud of our roots, a people who should be proud of our identities, whether it's a nation in Europe or an American identity. And he did something that I believe is incredibly important. He reframed America First. For years, critics have portrayed America First as isolationist. It's reckless. It's selfish. But what Rubio articulated was something different. America First doesn't mean America alone. It means that sovereign nations cooperate with each other, that alliances live up to their commitments. It means demanding seriousness from allies that have weakened their capabilities through all these self-inflicted policies that just fueled cultural and political rot. What we've been doing for essentially 35 years is almost managing a decline rather than actual leading. You have all these officials, and I don't call them leaders because they're not leaders. We have so many officials in the United States and in Europe that apologize for the past rather than simply acknowledging our sins and point to the principles that allowed us to confront those sins, try and correct some of those sins, build a freer, more just society than the world has ever known. Do they think when Western civilization falls that the next system that comes along is going to be any better? Do we think if the United States collapses that a world order under communist China is going to be much better? Open your eyes. You have these officials that downplay our achievements, make them look as if they're moral embarrassments that have done more harm than good, instead of recognizing them as a product of a civilization that advanced liberty and science, human dignity, and self-government to an unprecedented scale. You have these officials that accepted deindustrialization as inevitable rather than a consequence of deliberate policy choices, bad policy choices. And they treat this idea of mass migration as necessary because they look at our culture as not worth preserving. And so demographic transformation is a form of atonement for past sins. Now, Rubio rejected that entire globalist framework. He called for a Western supply chain. He said AI and space, we have to do more for critical minerals. We can't let adversaries control those. We have to be in charge of our destiny. Industrial capacity needs to be created in Europe and the United States. That will strengthen our defense. It protects our people and our way of life. Borders that protect cohesion and our national identity. Energy policies that empower citizens rather than impoverish them. This is not just trade policy. This is survival policy for the 21st century. This moves America First to a strategy, a civilizational strategy. And that is why this speech matters, because it signals that the post-Cold War consensus is over, that we need to stop being ashamed of ourselves. We need to reject the self-loathing that has crept into our societies and our institutions, particularly our educational institutions. This speech signals that sovereignty, it's not optional. It's necessary. No more apologies. No more complacency. We need to chart our own course for the 21st century. And as we approach our 250th anniversary, the message could not be more timely. See, the founders never had any intention on creating a global welfare state. They had no intention on a society without borders. They didn't fight a revolution to replace one distant ruling class with another. They created a sovereign republic grounded in a civilizational tradition, where ultimately the people are in charge of their destiny. The self-evident truths that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and among those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And Rubio's speech was a reminder of that. So in the next segment, I'm going to walk you through the most important moments of that speech, not just as passive listeners, but as citizens who need to understand what this pivot means and why it's so important. Because whether you agree with every word or not, something shifted in Munich. And history has a way of revealing those moments in hindsight. And it seems this time, we may be examining it in real time. So hang tight and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So now let's walk through the speech together. And I encourage everyone to listen to the full speech. I have it up on the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, so check it out. There are several key moments of the speech. And I want to start by listening to how Secretary of State Rubio begins with this civilizational argument. Take a listen.
That infamous wall that had cleaved this nation into two came down, and with it an evil empire. And the East and West became one again. But the euphoria of this triumph led us to a dangerous delusion that we had entered, quote, the end of history, that every nation would now be a liberal democracy, that the ties formed by trade and by commerce alone would now replace nationhood, that the rules-based global order, an overused term, would now replace the national interest, and that we would now live in a world without borders where everyone became a citizen of the world. This was a foolish idea that ignored both human nature and it ignored the lessons of over 5,000 years of recorded human history. And it has cost us dearly.
That right there is a frontal assault on the post-Cold War consensus, the post-Cold War mindset. For 30 years, Western elites treated the fall of the Soviet Union as the end of ideological conflict. They believed liberal democracy is going to spread automatically. It's going to flourish everywhere. Trade is going to replace national identity. Global institutions are going to replace sovereign interests. And Rubio calls that a dangerous delusion. That phrase actually matters because it reframes the last 3.5 decades not as inevitable evolution, but it was a policy error, policy mistakes. And notice that he invokes 5,000 years of recorded human history. He's arguing that human nature did not change in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, that nations do not dissolve because commerce increases. Identity doesn't disappear because supply chains expand. That is a direct rebuke of the idea that history bends automatically toward liberal order. He is reminding the room that Munich was where the West once faltered in 1938 with appeasement. And what Rubio is signaling is that we cannot repeat past mistakes. We can't repeat the mistake by appeasing a new global order, a global order that ignores our national survival. And it sets the foundation for everything else that follows. Now listen to how he defines the West.
We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifices our forefathers made together for the common civilization to which we have fallen heir. And so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. The reason why, my friends, is because we care deeply. We care deeply about your future and ours.
Now, I'm sure this is the line that's going to trigger a lot of critics, especially the left and those suffering from TDS, but listen carefully to what he actually says. He doesn't describe an empire. He doesn't describe racial hierarchy. He describes civilizational inheritance, that we have a shared history, we have shared faith tradition, shared sacrifice. That's not excluding people. That's not xenophobic. It's not racist. It's about continuity. He's not apologizing for Western civilization. For years, Western officials, they've spoken out about our civilization as something that they have to manage and correct and atone for. Rubio speaks about it from a point of pride, explains that our civilization is worth preserving. That's a tonal shift, and the tone matters in geopolitics. And in the next clip, it's going to be the hinge point of the entire speech.
The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to always be the master of its own economic and political destiny.
I want that to sink in for a minute. Armies do not fight for abstractions. Again, they fight for a people. They fight for a culture and an identity. They fight for a nation. This is profound because it answers the questions that most officials avoid. What are we actually defending? We're not defending GDP, not materialism or acquiring more stuff, not bureaucracies to protect the governments, not policy frameworks. We fight for a way of life, and if you cannot define that way of life clearly, you can't expect anyone to sacrifice to defend it. For decades, Western governments have reduced defense conversations to budgets and treaties. Rubio brings it back to identity and culture. And that's the civilizational argument I'm talking about. It goes beyond just a military argument. I remember watching a clip of protests in France because they were raising the retirement age, and you had a kid screaming into the camera that my grandfather didn't fight in World War II so that they could raise the retirement age. No, they didn't fight in World War II about a retirement age. They didn't care about a retirement age. They cared about survival. That's what they were fighting for in World War II. They were fighting for their identity, for their culture, for their nation. We seem to have forgotten that. We seem to think today it's about stuff and defending how we live our lives and the luxuries we get to enjoy in life. But it goes far beyond that. And then Marco Rubio pivots to economics and migration. And this is where the speech moves from the philosophical to accountability and realism. Take a listen to this.
Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade. It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs and dangerously vulnerable to crisis.
That is not nostalgic rhetoric. That's an indictment. And he says it clearly, deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was voluntary. Our officials chose it. The factories, they didn't vanish by accident. When we look at supply chains, China didn't gain a stronghold by accident. It wasn't a coincidence. The policies that the officials created incentivized it, and they damaged ordinary people throughout their societies. And yet they continually get reelected over and over and over again. And the question is why? These people have done enormous damage to our countries. It was a choice. They chose to do that. The good news, though, is if it was a choice, that means it could be reversed. And this is what reframes America First. See, it's not about protectionism for its own sake. It's not about industrial sovereignty. Think about AI, space, critical minerals, defense manufacturing. This is survival-level infrastructure that's necessary in the 21st century. And then as far as migration goes, listen to what Marco Rubio has to say about that.
And in a pursuit of a world without borders, we opened our doors to an unprecedented wave of mass migration that threatens the cohesion of our societies, the continuity of our culture, and the future of our people. We made these mistakes together. And now, together, we owe it to our people to face those facts and to move forward, to rebuild. Mass migration isn't some fringe concern of little consequence. It was and continues to be a crisis which is transforming and destabilizing societies all across the West. We must also gain control of our national borders. Controlling who and how many people enter our countries, this is not an expression of xenophobia. It is not hate. It is a fundamental act of national sovereignty. And the failure to do so is not just an abdication of one of our most basic duties owed to our people. It is an urgent threat to the fabric of our societies and the survival of our civilization itself.
Now, I'm going to guarantee that this section is going to be the one that dominates headlines. You're going to have the haters out there. They're going to be like, oh, he's a racist. He's xenophobic. I already heard someone. He's turning his back on his Cuban heritage. But notice the framing that Rubio uses. He doesn't call migration hate. He doesn't demonize individuals for wanting to come to the United States or Europe. What he does is he frames border control as sovereignty, and this is key. Sovereignty is not xenophobic. Sovereignty is not ethnocentric. Every functioning nation in human history has controlled its borders. Every functioning nation has a right to determine who can and cannot come into their country. The United States has immigration law written directly into the Constitution under the Naturalization Clause, Article 1, Section 8. And what Marco Rubio is arguing is that uncontrolled migration destabilizes cohesion. Now, you may agree or disagree with the policy specifics, but you cannot dismiss his argument because we are seeing it in real time. We are seeing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people flooding in to other countries, not to adapt to the countries that they immigrated to, but to bring their own culture and change the countries that they immigrated to. We see it here in the United States. So when we're looking at the idea of border security and migration, it's not out of fear. The whole point of border security is to preserve the social fabric of our society. That's deliberate. That's common sense. And why shouldn't it be? Why shouldn't we be able to determine who can come into our country and who can't? Why shouldn't we be proud of our heritage? Why shouldn't we want social cohesion, especially in the United States, where we created the melting pot to form this unique identity, an American identity, that we are proud of who we are, an American identity that doesn't forget our roots. And Rubio explained that in the next clip. Take a listen.
So in a time of headlines heralding the end of the transatlantic era, let it be known and clear to all that this is neither our goal nor our wish. Because for us Americans, our home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe.
He is explicitly saying the United States isn't abandoning Europe. He's saying we are bound by history. We are civilizational heirs. And that revitalization requires strength. That's a subtle but crucial distinction. And the most important part of his speech is not how he connects to the past, but how he frames the future. Take a listen.
And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline. We do not seek to separate, but to revitalize an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history. What we want is a reinvigorated alliance that recognizes that what has ailed our societies is not just a set of bad policies, but a malaise of hopelessness and complacency. An alliance the alliance that we want is one that is not paralyzed into inaction by fear. fear of climate change, fear of war, fear of technology. Instead, we want an alliance that boldly races into the future. And the only fear we have is the fear of the shame of not leaving our nations prouder, stronger, and wealthier for our children.
That is not isolationism. That is not retreat. That's a rejection of managed decline, a rejection of the neocon ways of the past. Notice what he says. We don't want allies shackled by guilt and shame. We don't want allies paralyzed by fear and weakness. We don't want to be managed caretakers of decline. We want a rebirth. And the emotional core to the argument, the only fear we have is the shame of not leaving our nations prouder, stronger, and wealthier for our children. That line is so powerful, and it ties everything together. See, this isn't about nostalgia. It doesn't ignore our past, both the good and the bad. It looks at the totality of our history, but it's also forward-looking and aspirational. This is where you have Reagan's optimism fused with Trump's hard-nosed realism. Confidence without naivete, sovereignty without isolation. And alliances can only be strong without dependency. And that combination, that's what makes this speech so significant. To me, these clips represent the key moments of the speech. And we also need to zoom out a little bit, because this was not just a good speech. This is the beginnings of a new doctrine that is emerging. And in the next segment, we're going to examine exactly what this new doctrine is, why this should mark the formal end of this period of malaise that has plagued our societies for far too long. Everyone hang tight, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Now, this is a really important episode. I encourage you to share it with 3 or 4 other people you know. The more people that listen, the more will understand what's at stake. More importantly, they'll know what this new doctrine is that's emerging, that we need to make sure it takes hold, because what Rubio delivered in Munich, it wasn't just a good speech. This was a reset, a reset. If people can just come to their senses, they'll see this. For 35 years, American foreign policy operated under this assumption that the Cold War ended. We were on top. It's always going to stay that way. History resolved itself. We have to start spread of democracy throughout the world, that democracy is culturally compatible with every other civilization that exists. You're going to have markets that are going to harmonize, and nations would no longer have ambitions. Global institutions are the key to solving all the world's problems. And the idea of nationhood is gradually going to become secondary to this new transnationalist era that we're living in. And that worldview shaped everything. But Rubio declared that it's a worldview which caused enormous devastation both in America and throughout Europe, that it's led to an increasingly unstable world. So I'm going to break down what this new doctrine actually is so that everyone understands it. Because for some reason, we can't separate ourselves out and view things through the prism of other people. And we have this mentality where we assume that ideology is universal, where everyone wants Western liberalism throughout the entire globe, and economic integration is going to stop conflict and eliminate ambition, that adversaries are going to become stakeholders and trusted partners as opposed to being hostile and serving their own interests. But what did we end up seeing because of these policies? Well, China integrated into the global trading system and weaponized it. Russia integrated into the energy markets, weaponized it. Mass migration accelerated. It fractured cohesion within nations, especially Europe. It was weaponized as well. Industrial capacity was hollowed out. Supply chains became vulnerabilities. Ordinary citizens hurt in the process. And rather than understand the grievances of their citizens, what do the officials in all these countries in Europe and America do? Well, they mock, they ridicule their own people. So the lesson is not that cooperation is impossible. The lesson is that human nature did not change, even though these people wanted to change human nature. And as I stated in last week's America's Founding Series episode, where I focused on Fisher Ames, he understood human nature is the one constant throughout history. Borders change, nations change, civilizations rise and fall, but human nature does not. Nations pursue interests, civilizations defend identity. Power still matters. Rubio gets it. And his argument is simple but profound, that the elites, the academics, they misread history. And when you misread history, you miscalculate policy. It's realism at its core. What many critics miss in this speech is that Rubio didn't argue withdrawal from the world. He argued for a revitalized partnership with European countries, a rebirth of Western civilization. See, America First is this framework. America First doesn't mean isolation. It means sovereign nations cooperating with each other that we have shared interests in. And it's going to be based on national security. It's going to be based on the idea of maintaining our culture and our values that made us strong in the first place. So that's a major shift of what we've seen from Republicans and Democrats in the past for years. For years, you had America carry military and financial burdens, and European allies would reduce defense spending, and they would lean on America for its guarantees, and they took advantage. It's not sitting there berating allies. It's just stating the truth. They took advantage of our goodwill. And I'm not saying that we didn't do it for our own national interests. We certainly did. But we carried a disproportionate amount of risk. Rubio's saying that, hey, we want to maintain alliances with you. We want to have these strong alliances, but we need strong partners. You can't have a durable transatlantic relationship if one side is managing decline and the other side is carrying the load. That can't work. We have to look at this idea of reciprocity, that you have to live up to your commitments. Then you look at the constitutional aspect. You know, the founders, they didn't envision an America that's going to become a global force, serve and protect everyone's interests around the world. They envisioned a republic that's capable of self-defense and self-determination. So Rubio is applying that same logic to the Western alliance itself. It's about the preservation of Western civilization. For years, Western officials, they berate their own people, degrade their own culture. They made it as if their nations were the problem in the world. But Rubio elevated it, and he spoke in civilizational language. He spoke about heritage, about faith, about national pride, about the family. And that matters, because ultimately, our national identities precedes policy. If you treat your civilization as something shameful, you're going to design policies that weaken your nation and hurt your own people. If you treat it as something worthy, on the other hand, you're going to govern confidently, and you're going to put the interests of the people and the nation first, and everyone prospers from that. And this is where our 250th anniversary becomes relevant, because America is not just a political arrangement. It is the culmination of a civilizational tradition that stretches back centuries. And that tradition includes the rule of law, individual liberty, scientific inquiry, representative government, religious freedom, private property. So we could acknowledge our flaws without rejecting the foundations which made us great, the foundations that we're built on. Rubio's doctrine rejects oikophobia, this disdain for our own civilization that has plagued us for far too long. It's time to stop with that mindset. It's time to replace that mindset with pride, not through arrogance or supremacy, but with confidence in who we are as a people, one in which ultimately strengthens our nations. The idea of individual betterment, that the state exists to serve its people, not by giving us stuff, but by making sure, protecting us, and making sure that we get to express our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because if the people's lives are better, then our nation is stronger and more unified. When we look at what Rubio is saying, it is so important. And it also impacts another critical pillar within this new doctrine that Rubio spoke of. And we're talking about economic realism. For decades, policymakers tried to separate economics from security. Trade was treated as neutral. Supply chains, commercial. Manufacturing, optional. We get others to do it. But Rubio rejects that. And frankly, so should every policymaker, given what we witnessed during the pandemic. It's amazing to me what we saw with the supply chains during the pandemic, and we have seen no realistic policy changes until now. You're talking 6 years later. See, Rubio rejects that. Rubio ties together AI, space, critical minerals, industrial capacity, because he understands that if we want to maintain our position in the world for the 21st century, we got to lead in these areas. And this actually reframes America First entirely, because it's not about tariffs. It's about resilience. It's about survival in a world that's quickly and rapidly changing. If adversaries control your rare earth minerals, which we've spoken a lot about on this podcast, if they control your semiconductors, your energy inputs, your manufacturing base, you are not a sovereign nation. You are dependent and vulnerable to those nations that are advancing their own interests on the world stage, and they're doing it to the detriment of your own interests. The founders understood this instinctively. I mean, Hamilton's report on manufacturers, it argued that economic independence underpins political independence. Rubio is now updating that logic for the 21st century by including AI and by including space and rare earth minerals. The emotional core of the speech was the rejection of this idea of a managed decline, that we don't have to be in decline. For too long, we act like decline was inevitable. It was necessary in order to atone for our sins of the past. So they try to rationalize stagnation. They try to normalize mass migration. And in the process, they imposed destructive policies, including energy policies. And they did it as a sign of virtue. That's why they did it. They believed it was virtuous to do these things. They looked at cultural erosion, our cultural erosion, as progress. Rubio rejected that in his speech. He argues that decline is not destiny, that decline is the outcome of decades of failed policies. And to course correct, we need to move away from those policies. So you see Reagan's influence is clear. Reagan did not accept that the Soviet Union was a permanent structure, that we would forever be linked in this bipolar world. He didn't accept American stagnation. Reagan spoke of a renewal. And Rubio channels that optimism, but he adds Trump's realism about global competition, the business aspect to it. And it's powerful. And if this speech reflects actual policy direction, we are witnessing a major pivot from globalism to civilizational realism, from shaming who we are as a people to one of confidence in our cultural identity. And it moves us away from what he deemed the managed decline to a renewal, a rebirth. And that's what I mean by a new doctrine, a doctrine that will come to shape everything, whether it's defense policy, trade agreements, alliances, immigration policy, energy policy, everything. Rubio did a remarkable job on delivering this speech. It was coherent, it was well-structured, it was historically grounded, but it most importantly signals that the United States is not willing to ignore the realities of what we face. Now, even though it was a brilliant speech, you're going to have the detractors. They're already attacking it. They're trying to mischaracterize it. There is little doubt that many are going to fiercely resist what Rubio laid out, and I want to address those critics head on when we get back from a quick commercial break. Welcome back to the P.A.S. report. So we talked about the new American doctrine laid out by Rubio. Now we need to address what's coming. It's not a shock, not going to surprise you, because whenever you have someone that speaks so unapologetically about sovereignty, civilization, national confidence, you know the labels are coming. You know exactly the labels that are going to be used. And you're going to hear Jim Crow 2.0, isolationism, Christian nationalism, white supremacy, Western supremacy, colonization, climate denialism, xenophobia, betrayal of immigrant identity. And I want to take these one at a time. So the whole, this is isolation. Well, no, it isn't. Isolationism is withdrawal. Isolationism is disengagement. Rubio explicitly rejected that in his speech. He said America does not seek separation, it seeks revitalization. He argued for a stronger alliance, stronger allies, stronger defense capabilities, stronger cooperation between sovereign states with mutual interests. That's not a retreat. Okay, just because you call out other nations to step up their game, that doesn't mean you're retreating. We want to preserve Western civilization. For decades. The United States subsidized European defense, and you have European governments, they reduce their military capacity. When it comes to energy, they increase their dependence on adversaries like Russia and China. And so we called them out on that. Demanding our allies put their interests in the interests of Western civilization first is not isolation, it's common sense. Trump brought it up the first administration, his first term, when he called out Germany publicly and said, why are you buying oil from Russia? You're talking about Putin being the biggest threat to European stability, and yet you're buying oil, natural gas from them. Why? Buy it from America. Buy it from your ally. Strong alliances don't go to their adversaries. Another claim that has already sprung up is that this is Christian nationalism. He's trying to push a theocracy. No, it's not. And those that say that, I mean, honestly, enough with the juvenile comments. I mean, those that say that, they just reveal how simple-minded they really are. They reduce everything as if it's black and white. There is a difference between acknowledging our Judeo-Christian roots and advocating for a theocracy, a big difference. And when Rubio references Christian faith as part of Western civilization's inheritance, he is stating a historical fact. The moral vocabulary of human dignity, natural rights, limits on state power, government power, it didn't ever emerge in a vacuum. It developed within a particular civilization framework, most notably Christianity, and acknowledging that does not mean imposing religious rule. It just simply means understanding the roots of our culture. As I always state, you can't defend what you don't know or what you refuse to understand. And if a nation of people are ignorant of their founding, their history, their culture, it's easy to tear that nation down. And we're seeing it, right? That's why whenever you bring up religion, people immediately scream separation in church and state, yet they have no idea that the whole idea of separation in church and state is not to protect the politics from the church, not to protect the government from the church. The whole idea of separation of church and state is to protect the religions from the government, from the politics. Then you're going to have others scream that this is Western supremacy, white supremacy. It's nothing more than a 21st century version of colonization. Again, it's not. When you look at it and they're using that simple-minded logic of theirs, supremacy implies domination over others. And I challenge anyone listening to the speech, particularly those on the left, go through it. Go through it. I want you to show me where Rubio said the United States and Europe are going to reign supreme throughout the world. All Rubio did was describe our heritage and culture. He didn't describe a hierarchy. He didn't describe anything that alludes to ethnocentrism. Western civilization is defined by the rule of law, individual liberty, representative government, scientific inquiry, and the concept that power has to be restrained. These principles, they're not racial. They're philosophical. They're rooted in human dignity. It's not about supremacy. Defending Western civilization, it doesn't require us to denigrate other people's civilization. It doesn't require us to ignore some of the atrocities we may engage in. When you defend Western civilization, we are recognizing where we come from. We're recognizing what we achieve, what links us together as a people, and that we refuse to erase our own civilization. Another attack is that this is climate denial and anti-progress. Again, lazy argument. I mean, critiquing policies that weaken your own industrial base while adversaries expand theirs is not denying environmental stewardship. It's recognizing the geopolitical reality that we live in. If you impose energy constraints on yourself that your competitors do not share, you weaken your own population and you strengthen their populations. If you waste trillions of dollars on green energy initiatives that don't work or are extremely expensive for the sake of self-righteousness, that is not a virtue. You are harming your own people. You're making us more vulnerable to the malign forces that exist out there. A serious environmental policy accounts for national strength and global competition. Otherwise, you're just inflicting harm. Otherwise, you're just inflicting harmful policies. You want to disguise it under the banner of morality, but it destroys your nation. Then you have the whole, this is anti-immigrant. And this one deserves a lot of attention. Rubio is the son of Cuban immigrants. His life is the American story. Assimilation, opportunity, upward mobility, civic integration, love of country, patriotism. There is nothing anti-immigrant about controlling borders. All you people out there that believe that if a nation controls its borders, it's racist, you're insane. There is nothing xenophobic about saying that immigration must be lawful and orderly. The United States has always welcomed newcomers, but historically, immigration was paired with assimilation into our civic culture. And what Rubio argues is that mass uncontrolled migration destabilizes cohesion within a society. The principle that sovereign nations control entry, it's foundational to the nation-state concept. If you don't have it, you don't have its state. Without borders, citizenship is meaningless. Without citizenship, you don't have self-government. Without self-government, you don't have constitutional liberty. It really is that simple. And unfortunately, though, that's the intent of some, isn't it? These people calling Rubio all sorts of names. Oh, he betrayed his Cuban heritage. It's such a juvenile argument, and it's aggravating. My Italian heritage is important to me, but the strength of my nation comes first. I don't have a loyalty to Italy. My loyalty is to the United States of America. The whole point of the melting pot is that when you come to this country, when you come to America, you assimilate into our culture. You can maintain some of the links of your native land, but your loyalty and your duty is to the United States first. Otherwise, why are you here? If you're not willing to accept that, then get out. Imagine what America would look like if every immigrant group kept their primary political loyalty to the country that they left. How well do you think that would work out for us? Because that's not a melting pot. That's a patchwork of competing foreign allegiances, and I could assure you it would lead to war within America. The whole genius of America is simple. Keep your heritage, but your civic loyalty is to one flag, one constitution, one republic. Why do people hate when that's said? I don't understand it. And why does a speech like the one that Rubio gave, why does it provoke such immediate hostility? The answer is actually simple. Because it rejects this moral framework that has dominated Western elite circles for 3 decades. All these so-called policy experts, all these so-called leaders. It rejects apology as a foreign policy, rejects our decline as inevitable, rejects the idea that national identity is primitive, a relic of the past. But it's not only what it rejects that they hate so much, it's also what it asserts, that civilizations must choose to survive. And we, as members of Western civilization, do choose to survive. We're going to defend it. We're going to fight for it. And as we approach our 250th year anniversary, understand that it's not just a milestone, it's a test. Will we treat our past, our history, and our culture as an embarrassment? Or are we going to treat it as a legacy worth defending? Are we okay with our decline, or do we want to be the architects of this renewal? That's the choice. And this is where Rubio's speech becomes larger than Rubio. Because whether he ever runs for president or not, this speech plants a marker. It says the post-Cold War illusion is over, that sovereignty isn't an outdated principle, that pride is not arrogance, that strong alliances don't require submission, that our civilization matters. See, civilizations, they don't collapse suddenly. They decay slowly over time. You have officials that will rationalize its weakness, officials that will normalize stagnation. And we've seen so many officials in the Western world do just that. Rubio is now arguing for a better path forward, one that's not the end, but continues our story, one based on peace and prosperity. You don't have to agree with every word of his speech to recognize how important his speech is. This was a message to the entire Western world. It was a message that needed to be delivered. It's a message that seems to be resonating. History's not finished. It never will be finished. It's always going to go on. The question, though, is going to be, how are we going to shape it? Now, if you found this episode valuable, share it. Because we need to have serious conversations about these concepts, civilization, sovereignty, where we want to go as a society. So forward it to someone who thinks America is in an inevitable decline. Forward it to someone who believes that the American experiment is over and the communists are taking over. Forward it to someone who has lost their faith. I want to thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe to the P.A.S. report so you never miss an episode.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.